Stand by now for See It Now with Edward R. Murrow, which originates in Studio 41 in New York City. Alcoa, Aluminum Company of America, in cooperation with CBS Television, presents the distinguished reporter and news analyst Edward R. Murrow in See It Now, edited and produced by Mr. Murrow and Fred W. Friendly. A weekly presentation of Aluminum Company of America, the nation's leading producer of aluminum. Now, speaking to you from the control room of Studio 41 is the editor of See It Now, Edward R. Murrow.
Good evening. Permit me to read what has been said in substance on this program before. This program is a weekly document for television, both live and on film, and is not designed to present hard, fast-breaking news. I and my co-editor, Fred Friendly, have been delegated the responsibility for its content. Never has our sponsor, the Aluminum Company of America, attempted to pass upon subject matter or to influence the selection of material. See It Now operates under the broadcasting policy set by CBS. Last week, we made a report on Senator Joseph R. McCarthy. We labeled it as by definition controversial. In accordance with CBS policy of fairness and equality, we offered the senator time to reply, tonight or a week from tonight. He suggested the date of April 6th, and we accepted, and he now says he will appear on that date. On See It Now, we occasionally use a phrase, the little picture. Tonight, we bring you a little picture of a little woman, Mrs. Annie Lee Moss, and the due process of law. Until 3 weeks ago, Mrs. Moss probably knew very little about Senator McCarthy, General Zwicker, Mr. Cohn, or the other principals engaged in the argument in Washington. Let me attempt to get the chronology of the event straight. On Washington's birthday, February 22, Monday, Senator McCarthy and Secretary of the Army Stevens were in total controversy over the General Zwicker case. Both men spoke in or near Philadelphia that Monday, and both returned to Washington for their big showdown, scheduled for Thursday. But when Senator McCarthy arrived back in Washington later that afternoon, he had some added news for the country and the Army and Secretary Stevens. It was the lead story right across the country. The New York Times, for example, said McCarthy asserts he has a new red link to Army. The New York Daily News said, McCarthy calls extra hearing. New Army red case on today. The Cincinnati Enquirer. McCarthy to air new case of known red in Army. The Houston Chronicle. Call Army Code Clerk ex-red. Chicago Daily Tribune. Probe new Army red case. My own nightly radio program covered it by saying, Senator McCarthy charged today that the Army now employs a woman in its code room who was and still may be an active communist. Now on Tuesday, February 23, Mrs. Mary Stalcup Marquard, who had been an undercover agent in the Communist Party for the FBI, testified about Mrs. Moss. I quote from the official record, which is just here. The chairman, Senator McCarthy. The principal reason you are testifying this morning is because we understand that a woman who is currently employed by the Department of the Army and her job description places her in the Army's code room in the Signal Corps, handling the encoding and decoding of confidential and top-secret messages, may have been a member of the cell that you have full information about, that you may have collected her dues. This woman's name is Annie Lee Moss. I wonder if you would tell us now whether or not, early in 1944, you gave reports to the FBI on Annie Lee Moss. Mrs. Marquard. I did. The chairman, would you tell us what you told the FBI in those reports? Mrs. Marquard, I recall, sir, that I had a woman by the name of Annie Lee Moss on the list of card-carrying, dues-paying members of the Northeast Club. And at that period in the history of the Communist Party, detailed lists were kept. The chairman, was Annie Lee Moss a member of the Communist Party? Mrs. Marquard, she was. The chairman, you collected dues from Annie Lee Moss? Mrs. Marquard, I was not specifically the dues collector at that point. I was the chairman of the club. I had overall responsibility for the dues collection, but I was not actually handling the funds. 3 pages later, again quoting from the official record, Senator McClellan, may I inquire of the witness, Did you know her personally, so you could identify her as a person, or was it only as a name to you, as a member of the Communist Party? Mrs. Marquardt, I don't specifically recall that I do know her as a person. I don't recall that I don't know her as a person either. I just have no specific recollection on that point. Wednesday, February 24, Mrs. Annie Lee Moss appeared as a witness. From her sickbed at home, she had denied ever being inside a code room. Senator McCarthy said he had sworn testimony she had been a communist. He warned her not to perjure herself by denying it, suggested she was too ill to testify. Mrs. Moss and her lawyer agreed she was too ill and promised to return at a later date. Mrs. Moss was very much in the news later that same Wednesday afternoon when Senator McCarthy and Secretary Stevens had their now famous luncheon. And the McCarthy-Stevens showdown, scheduled for the next day, Thursday, was called off. And on that Thursday, the Army suspended Mrs. Moss. Finally, last Thursday, March 11, Mrs. Annie Lee Moss was called before the committee again. And this is what our cameraman, Charlie Mack, saw through his camera.
The committee will come to order. Have the record show that all of the members of the subcommittee were notified of the time and place of the hearing, that the hearing was scheduled for this morning originally, but because some senators felt they could not attend, it was shifted to this afternoon. Who's your first witness, Mr. Cohen?
Mrs. Annie Lee Moss, Mr. Chairman.
Mrs. Morris. Is that Moss or Morris? Mrs. Moss. Sworn, Mrs. Moss. In this matter now in hearing before the committee, do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
May we get your full name for the record, please?
Annie Lee Moss.
M-O-S-S.
That's right.
And where do you reside, ma'am?
1244 Evos Street, Northeast.
Mrs. Moss, let me say for the record and for your information, for the information of your counsel, that you are not here because you are considered important in the communist apparatus. We have the testimony that you have been a communist. We are rather curious, however, to know that how you suddenly were shifted from a worker in a cafeteria to the code room. In other words, I am today much more interested in the handling of your case by your superiors and in your own personal activities. However, counsel will question you about your own activities also. Mr. Chairman, we will not hear from counsel. You've been told what the rule is. If you have anything to say it through your client.
Chairman, did you begin work at the General Accounting Office in 1945?
Yes, sir.
And prior to that time, had you been a cafeteria worker?
Yes, I have.
I see. While in the Pentagon since 1950, have you had any connection with coded messages? Have you ever handled coded messages?
No more than to transmit them.
Pardon me?
No more than to transmit the messages.
Then to transmit them. Did you transmit?
Receive
code?
or to transmit messages was all I had to do. And then the courtroom, I've never been into a courtroom in my life.
Do you know the type of classification? Do you know if they were secret, top secret, confidential?
No, sir.
In other words, you wouldn't know the degree of classification.
No, sir.
I see.
Now, the committee has had testimony, with which I know you and your counsel are familiar, to the effect that you were at that time a member of the Northeast Club of the Communist Party. Now, is that testimony true?
No, sir, it is not. Not of any time have I been a member of a communist party, and I have never seen a communist card.
You've never seen a communist card?
That's right.
Have you ever attended any communist meetings?
No, sir, I've never attended any communist meetings.
Have you ever subscribed to the Daily Worker?
No, sir, I didn't subscribe for the Daily Worker, and I wouldn't pay for it.
Say that you never have been a member of the Communist Party?
No, sir, I have not.
Now, Mrs. Marquardt, who was working for the FBI, who joined the Communist Party under orders from the FBI, has testified that while she never met you personally at a communist meeting, that your name was on the list of communists who are paying dues. Can you shed any light upon that?
No, sir. I don't even know what the dues are or where they were paid.
Do I understand you have never paid any money to the Communist Party? Is that correct?
That's right.
You've never paid any dues to anyone whom you thought was collecting them for the Communist Party?
That's right.
And you've never attended any communist meetings?
No, sir, I have not.
Mr. Cohen.
Now, with reference to your testimony about the Daily Worker, isn't it a fact that you regularly received the Daily Worker and that you arranged to receive it through Rob Hall, who was one of the leading communists in the District of Columbia?
Robert Hall brought that paper to my house where I was rooming one Sunday morning. And my son tells me that my husband told him not to bring that paper back there anymore. And he said he paid him for whatever he had. And he didn't bring it anymore. We didn't get this communist paper anymore until after we had moved southwest at 72 R Street.
Did you know Robert Hall?
No, sir, not personally.
He came to your house, you say, one Sunday morning? Yeah.
Yes, that's the one where I was rooming one Sunday morning.
And did your husband give Robert Hall any money that Sunday morning?
I wasn't there that morning.
Well, now, you said your son told you something about it.
Yes.
Did your son tell you whether or not Robert Hall collected money?
He told me his daddy gave him some money and told him to not come back there with those papers anymore. In fact, he asked that my son sell those papers. And his daddy said he couldn't sell the papers. And he paid him for whatever he had. I don't know how many it was.
I think maybe if you wouldn't lean quite as close to the microphone, we could hear you better. I've got some difficulty hearing you. Is your husband living?
No, sir, he's dead.
He's dead. And you say you personally did not know Robert Hall.
No, sir.
That you were not there when he came to the house.
That's right.
Do you know what business Robert Hall had with your husband besides merely delivering the copy of the Daily Worker?
No, sir, I do not.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to excuse myself. I've got a rather important appointment tonight, which I've got to work on right now, and I wonder if Senator Muntz, you would take over as chairman.
May I suggest that she be asked how many times she ever saw Mr. Hall?
About how many times?
That was Senator Symington of Missouri.
Well, each time I went to the Union.
Senator Munt, South Dakota.
Mrs. Moss testified in executive session that
Mr. Cohn wanted to know about Mrs. Moss's connection with Rob Hall, an alleged communist leader in Washington. But this Rob Hall was known to be a white man.
We assume that is the same Rob Hall.
Well, maybe we could check.
If there is another one or anything like that, we'll certainly explore.
Well, now, let's get, if we may, Mr. Counsel. Is the Robert Hall that you know a colored man?
Yes, sir.
You are sure of that?
Yes, I'm pretty sure that he was colored.
Does he look like a colored man, or does he look more like a white
The
man?
man whom I have in mind as Robert Hall was a man about my complexion.
About your complexion?
Yes.
Well, it's fair to say that you didn't think that he was a white man.
No, sir, I didn't.
Well, I'd like to put in the record that one of the reporters said that he is certain that Robert Hall of the Daily Worker is a white man.
One's black and the other's white, they're different.
Can you tell us why, assuming there are two Robert Halls here, can you tell us why this Robert Hall who was in the Union would come around and ask your family to subscribe to the Daily Worker? Did you know him to be a communist, or?
No, sir, I did not.
You did not know him to be a
sir.
communist? I see.
Ms. Morse, what are you doing now? Are you working?
No, sir.
Why not?
I was suspended.
You were suspended?
Yes, until this was over.
By the
Department of the Army.
Department of the Army?
Yes.
How long ago was that?
I believe it was 25th of February.
What reason did they give for suspending you?
This woman, under suspicion because of charges made by Senator McCarthy and Roy Cohn, alleged who have examined and corrected secret and encoded overseas messages, attempted to read the uncoded words of her suspension notice.
10-450, pending adjudication of your case under SR 620-220-1.
Did you read that the very best you could?
Yes, I did.
No.
Have you ever, to the best of your knowledge, have you ever talked to a communist in your life?
No, sir, not to my knowledge.
Did you ever hear of Karl Marx?
Who was that?
Well, I'll pass the question. You were born in South Carolina, moved to North Carolina, and then moved to Washington?
That's right.
Do you think you're a good American?
Yes?
Would you ever do anything to hurt your country?
No, sir.
Have you ever talked to anybody about espionage? About... You want to...
No, sir.
Have you ever had any information that you received in your job that you passed on to anybody about these codes?
No, sir.
Did anybody ever ask you for any of that information?
No, sir. If they had, I would have reported it.
You would have reported it.
Certainly would have.
Has anybody ever asked you to join the Communist Party?
No, sir.
Has anybody ever asked you to join any organization of any kind that you thought might be against the best interest of the United States?
No, sir.
What are you living on now? Have you got any savings?
No, sir.
You haven't?
No.
If you don't get work pretty soon, what are you going to do?
Going down to the welfare.
Going down to welfare.
We had, among part of the testimony of Mrs. Marquardt was to the effect that another member of this club and an active member of the Communist Party at that time, whose home communist meetings were held, was a woman named Hattie Griffin. Now, did you know Hattie Griffin?
I lived with Hattie Griffin just 2 weeks.
And at what address did you live with Hattie Griffin?
I was in the 600 block of 2nd Street. I don't remember the number.
That is the same with, that is in accordance with Mrs. Marquardt's testimony as well. Now, when you were living with Hattie Griffin during that 2-week period, did you know that she was a member of the Communist Party?
No, sir, I did not.
Did you know that she was holding communist meetings in the home?
No, sir, I did not.
You did not know that?
No, sir.
So she never told you that?
No, sir.
Did you ever discuss with this woman, you say you lived with 2 weeks, did you ever discuss communism with her?
No, sir.
In any way?
No, sir.
At any time?
Because I didn't know anything about it. I never heard it until 1948.
Was there anybody that she ever brought to the house for meetings?
No, sir, not while we were there.
Never once?
Not while we were there.
Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions of this witness at this time. I would say that we have the testimony of Mrs. Marquardt, the undercover agent of the FBI, stating that Annie Lee Morse was a member, a dues-paying member of the Communist Party, the Northeast Club of the Communist Party. We have corroboration of that testimony by another witness who was called before the committee and gave a sworn statement to the effect that she also knew Mrs. Morse as a member of the Northeast Club of the Communist Party.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make...
Senator McClellan, Arkansas.
We're making a statement here against a witness who has come and submitted to cross-examination. Now, she's already lost her job. She's been suspended because of this action. I'm not defending her. If she's a communist, I want her exposed. But to make these statements, we've got corroborating evidence that she is a communist. Under these circumstances, I think she's entitled to have it produced here in her presence and let the public know about it and let her know about it. I don't like to try people by hearsay evidence. I like to get the witnesses here and try my testimony under oath.
The chair will rule that the comment of Mr. Cohen be stricken from the record
Well, I didn't ask
We
that.
better
I
take
didn't
up
ask
an
that,
executive
Mr.
session
Chairman.
whether we should try to produce a witness in public because the FBI may have her undercover. We don't want to.
You can't strike these statements made by counsel here as to evidence that we're having and withholding. You cannot strike that from the press nor from the public mind once it's planted there. That is the evil of it. Well, I don't think it's fair to a witness, to a citizen of this country, to bring them up here and cross-examine them. Then when they get through, say, we've got something, the FBI has got something on you that condemns you.
The chair agrees.
It is not sworn testimony. It's convicting people by rumor and hearsay and innuendo.
Do you know anybody named Mrs. Mary Marquard?
No, sir, I do not.
I think the record ought to show that Mrs. Marquard says that she has never seen Mrs. Annie Lee Moss at any communist meeting, but it is her recollection that Mrs. Moss paid her dues and was a member in good standing. Do you know anybody else in this town named Morse? Have you ever looked up a telephone number that was... There any Morses in Washington besides you?
Yes, sir. There's 3 Annie Lee Morses.
What was that? Will you state that again?
There are 3 Annie Lee Morses, and when I went to get a real estate license, I had an awful lot of trouble then.
I want to say something to you, and I may be sticking my neck out, and I may be wrong, but I've been listening to you testify this afternoon, and I think you're telling the truth.
I certainly am.
And if you're not taken back in the Army, you come around and see me, and I'm going to see that you get a job.
Well, thank you.
You will notice that neither Senator McClellan nor Senator Symington nor this reporter know or claim that Mrs. Moss was or is a communist. Their claim was simply that she had the right to meet her accusers face to face. Senator McCarthy claimed that Mrs. Moss had access to the code room. The Army denies it. That's something that it ought to be easy enough to prove. In just a moment, we should like to run something else from the record, immediately after this word from the Aluminum Company of America.
Wherever you go in America, in communities large or small, the people who run a business and the people who run a home depend on trucks to deliver the products they want, when they want them. Today, as more and more trucks travel America's highways, more of them are being made of aluminum, Alcoa aluminum. Truck bodies of aluminum mean lightweight, strength, and economy. They mean a longer life, lower maintenance costs, and reduced operating costs. Trucks equipped with these long-lasting aluminum bodies save on tire and engine wear, save up to 20% on gasoline. And lighter aluminum bodies mean that a lighter, less expensive chassis can be used. Best of all, these trucks have a much greater carrying capacity. Truck bodies of other metals carry a smaller payload because they weigh more. Truck bodies of aluminum weigh so much less that payload space is often doubled. For the operator of a fleet of aluminum trucks, this extra carrying capacity means larger profits because he can increase his territory and make one truck do the work of 2. For the truck manufacturer, bodies made of Alcoa aluminum mean fast and easy fabrication. Parts of the aluminum body are first cut and riveted together. The floor, the back, the cab, the sides, and the roof form the complete truck body, which is then lowered to the chassis. The result is a truck body that is easier and faster to fabricate, and a truck that is lighter, stronger, and more economical to operate, because it is made of aluminum. Aluminum for truck bodies is one more example of how Alcoa, since 1888, has continued to pioneer new uses of this vital metal. In this case, new uses that mean better truck design and better truck construction. Aluminum from the nation's first and leading producer, Alcoa, Aluminum Company of America.
As we said, here is another document from the record. President Eisenhower, in November of 1953, talking about the right of every man to look his accuser in the eye.
Why are we proud? We are proud, first of all, because from the beginning of this nation, a man can walk upright, no matter who he is or who she is. He can walk upright and meet his friend or his enemy, and he does not fear that because that enemy may be a position in great power, that he can be suddenly thrown in jail to rot there without charges and with no recourse to justice. We have the Habeas Corpus Act, and we respect it. I was raised in a little town of which most of you have never heard. But in the West, it's a famous place. It's called Abilene, Kansas. We had as our marshal for a long time a man named Wild Bill Hickok. If you don't know about him, read your Westerns more. Now, that town had a code, and I was raised as a boy to prize that code. It was meet anyone face to face with whom you disagree. You could not sneak up on him from behind, do any damage to him without suffering the penalty of an outraged citizenry. If you met him face to face and took the same risks he did, you could get away with almost anything as long as the bullet was in the front. And today, although none of you have the great fortune, I think, of being from Abilene, Kansas, you live, after all, by that same code in your ideals and in the respect you give to certain qualities. In this country, if someone dislikes you or accuses you, he must come up in front. He cannot hide behind the shadow. He cannot assassinate you or your character from behind without suffering the penalties that an outraged citizenry will inflict. If we are going to continue to be proud that we are Americans, there must be no weakening of the codes by which we have lived, by the right to meet your accuser face to face if you have one, by your right to go to the church or the synagogue or even the mosque of your own choosing, by your right to speak your mind and be protected in it. Ladies and gentlemen, the things that make us proud to be Americans are of the soul and of the spirit.
November 1953, the 34th President of the United States, speaking rather eloquently about due process of law. Good night and good luck.
Wherever and whenever you think of food, think of Wherever aluminum foil. It keeps vegetables garden fresh. It locks in just the flavor you want, locks out all others. Leftovers stored in foil can be heated in the same foil, several at a time in one pan. Used in broiling, Wherever foil means tastier food. Baked potatoes and baked apples can be cooked and served in the same foil. Handy Wherever aluminum foil saves time, saves work, saves storage space. No messy pans to scour, makes homemaking easier. It saves food and makes food taste better. Friendly to food, Wherever aluminum foil is a member of the same family as the Wherever utensils, which have been famous in America's kitchens for generations. So remember, wherever and whenever you think of food, think of Wherever aluminum foil. Aluminum, from the ever-expanding facilities of America's foremost producer, Alcoa, Aluminum Company of America.